I still remember the exact second my mother laughed at me. It wasn't a quiet little chuckle either. It echoed through the massive auditorium, loud enough for hundreds of people to turn and stare. More than 400 Navy SEALs and military personnel were gathered for the ceremony, every eye suddenly shifting toward me as she pointed a finger in my direction and said, my daughter's just a secretary. My son's the real soldier." The room went silent for a heartbeat before everything changed. One of the senior officers stood at attention, looked directly at me, and in a voice that carried through the entire hall said, "Admiral, your guests have arrived." My mother's smile disappeared so fast it almost looked painful. She stared at me like she'd never seen me before. "So tell me honestly, if your own family spent decades pretending you were nothing while celebrating someone who had done almost nothing, would you forgive them after the truth finally came out?" For most of my life, I lived in my older brother Ethan's shadow. My name is Victoria, and growing up in my family meant understanding one simple rule: Ethan mattered and I didn't. Mom adored him from the day he was born. She called him her future hero, her champion, the son who would make the family proud. I was just there. Whenever relatives visited, she proudly displayed Ethan's report cards, sports trophies, and eventually every photograph he took wearing anything remotely military-looking. Meanwhile, my achievements stayed hidden in drawers or were quietly ignored. I wasn't a bad child. I studied hard, helped around the house, and never caused trouble, but somehow none of that ever counted. If I won an academic award, Mom would say, "That's nice, sweetheart," before asking Ethan how football practice went. If I came home excited about earning a scholarship, she'd remind everyone that Ethan was thinking about joining the military someday, as though merely considering it outweighed years of hard work. Dad wasn't cruel, but he rarely stood up for me. Keeping the peace was always easier than confronting Mom. I learned early that arguing wouldn't change anything, so instead, I focused on building a future nobody could take away from me. After college, I received an opportunity that changed everything. Through a leadership program connected to the military, I entered a career path that demanded absolute discipline, intelligence, and resilience. The work was exhausting. Every promotion required years of sacrifice. There were nights I slept in my office and mornings that started before sunrise. I couldn't tell my family much about my assignments because most of them were classified. Whenever Mom asked what I actually did, I'd simply smile and say, "Government work." She'd roll her eyes every single time. "So, paperwork." I never corrected her. Meanwhile, Ethan finally enlisted. To Mom, he instantly became America's greatest warrior. Never mind that he was still in basic training. She introduced him to neighbors as if he'd already won every military medal imaginable. "My son is protecting this country," she'd proudly announce. Nobody asked about me. At family dinners, conversations revolved entirely around Ethan. Mom hung a giant framed photograph of him in uniform above the fireplace. During Christmas, she bought ornaments with his military branch engraved on them. One year she even ordered matching shirts for the entire family that read, "Proud Family of a Soldier." Mine arrived 2 sizes too small. I honestly think she forgot I was coming. The years passed, and our lives moved in completely different directions. Ethan completed his service honorably, but eventually transitioned into civilian life. He deserved respect for his work, and I never took that away from him. The problem wasn't Ethan. The problem was Mom. She acted like my career didn't exist. Every time I earned another promotion, she'd ask whether I planned on finding a husband instead. When I bought my own house outright, she wondered aloud if Ethan might like to live there because he'd earned it. When I traveled overseas for official business, she'd assume I was attending office conferences. I stopped trying to explain. The fewer questions she asked, the safer everyone remained. My life became increasingly complicated. Responsibilities grew heavier. The people I worked beside included some of the most respected military leaders in the country. Every decision carried enormous consequences. I couldn't tell anyone what I was doing, where I was going, or who I was meeting. Sometimes months would pass without seeing my family. Mom never complained. She barely noticed. Then came the phone call that started everything. Mom excitedly announced that Ethan was receiving recognition during a Veterans Appreciation Ceremony hosted at one of the largest naval installations in the country. She insisted the whole family attend. You'll finally get to see what a real military career looks like, she laughed. I almost declined, but one of my aides informed me I was already scheduled to attend the exact same ceremony for entirely different reasons. The irony nearly made me laugh. I accepted. The morning of the ceremony, I arrived separately in an unmarked vehicle. Security protocols required it. Before entering the venue, several officers greeted me privately. Everything proceeded exactly according to protocol. Inside the auditorium, rows upon rows of decorated service members filled the seats. Active duty personnel stood alongside veterans. Senior officers quietly exchanged greetings. I spotted my family several rows ahead. Mom waved enthusiastically at Ethan. She didn't even notice me walking in. I took my assigned seat near the front. She frowned. Victoria, she whispered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, those seats aren't for office workers. I'm okay here. No, you're embarrassing us. Come sit with your family. I'll stay. She sighed dramatically, always trying to get attention. People nearby glanced over. I simply remained silent. As the ceremony began, speakers honored countless men and women who had served with distinction. Ethan's name appeared briefly among several veterans being recognized. Mom clapped louder than anyone else. She cried. She stood up. She shouted, "That's my son." Everyone politely applauded. Then she looked at me. "So, Victoria," she smirked, loud enough for multiple rows to hear, "seeing what a real soldier looks like must be inspiring." I forced a smile. "I'm proud of Ethan." She laughed. "But let's be honest, he's the one who serves his country, you shuffle papers." A few people awkwardly looked away. I wished she'd stop. She didn't. Then came the final announcement. The master of ceremonies paused. "Ladies and gentlemen, we would now like to recognize a leader whose decades of service have remained largely unseen by the public due to operational security." Mom leaned toward Ethan. "Probably another general." The speaker continued. "Please rise for Admiral Victoria Reynolds." Before I even moved, over 400 Navy SEALs, officers, enlisted personnel and veterans stood simultaneously. The sound shook the auditorium. Mom blinked. She looked around in confusion. Then she whispered, "Where is she?" I stood. The room erupted into applause. One senior officer approached. He saluted sharply. "Admiral." Every nearby officer followed. Salute after salute filled the room. Mom's face turned completely white. "No." Her voice barely existed anymore. "No, that's impossible." I walked calmly toward the stage. Behind me, I heard her whispering Ethan's name over and over, as though expecting him to explain reality. Instead, Ethan simply stared. He looked proud and embarrassed. As I accepted the recognition, the speaker described years of leadership, international operations, humanitarian missions, strategic command, and countless service members, whose lives had been shaped by my decisions. Nothing classified was revealed, but enough was said. Enough for everyone, including my mother, to realize how wrong she'd been for decades. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. If you spent your entire life being underestimated by your own family, would you finally confront them once the truth came out, or would you quietly walk away? Pause for a moment and let me know in the comments what you honestly would have done, because I wrestled with that decision for years. After the ceremony ended, Mom rushed toward me. People parted to let her through. She grabbed my hands. "Victoria, why didn't you tell me?" I looked into her eyes. "I tried." "No, you never." "I told you I served." "You said government work." "Because that's all I was allowed to say." Tears streamed down her face. "I thought." "I know what you thought." She looked around at the officers waiting respectfully nearby. "I've been telling everyone Ethan was our military hero." I smiled gently. He is a hero, so are thousands of others. But you, I never needed a spotlight. For the first time in my life, Ethan stepped beside me. He placed a hand on Mom's shoulder. Mom, do you realize you never once asked Victoria what she actually did? She couldn't answer. Because he was right. Not once. She'd already decided who mattered. Over the following weeks, she apologized repeatedly. Some apologies sounded genuine. Others sounded guilty because everyone now knew the truth. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. Neither is a lifetime of hurt. I forgave her, not because she earned it immediately, but because carrying resentment forever would only keep hurting me. Things slowly improved. She started calling just to ask how I was doing instead of comparing me to Ethan. She visited my home. She listened instead of talking. She admitted she'd confused loud recognition with true service. Ethan and I actually became closer than we'd ever been. He confessed he'd hated being compared to me all those years because it put impossible expectations on him while making me feel invisible. Neither of us had created the competition. Mom had. Eventually, our family dinners became normal. No favorites. No competitions. Just conversations. Sometimes she'd catch herself beginning another comparison before stopping mid-sentence and laughing at herself. Healing wasn't perfect, but it was real. Looking back now, I realized the greatest victory wasn't standing before hundreds of Navy SEALs while they saluted me. It wasn't hearing Admiral echo across the auditorium. It wasn't watching my mother finally understand the truth. The greatest victory was proving to myself that I never needed her approval to become the woman I was meant to be. Respect earned through integrity lasts far longer than praise built on assumptions. If someone keeps underestimating you, don't waste your energy arguing. Keep working quietly until your actions speak so loudly that nobody can ignore them. If you were on my side, make sure you like this video. Subscribe for more unbelievable Reddit-style stories filled with shocking twists, emotional family drama and satisfying endings. And most importantly, tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven your mother after everything she put me through, or would you have walked away forever? I genuinely want to know. Thanks for listening to my story, and I'll see you all in the next one.